Good evening and welcome to the MSD School Board meeting, special meeting. On behalf of the school board, we thank you for being here in person or virtually. I'm Matt Hankins, President of the school board. To my left is Heather Staggs, Vice President. To her left is Luke Jackson, Secretary. To his left is Dan Conway, Board Member, and to his left, Jackie Decker, Board Member. To my right is Assistant to the Superintendent, Mrs. Susie Lips.
And Mr. Boland, superintendent, will be unable to attend tonight due to a commitment that he could not exchange out of. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, if everyone would please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, Courtney, do we have anybody signed up for public comment? No. Okay, going on. Mrs. Lips, do we have a presentation for Mr. Dilly?
We do. Nate Dilley, our special ed director for the MSD of Martinsville, is here this evening to share with us some of his personnel navigation that he does.
Good afternoon. Thank you guys for allowing me the chance to come in and talk to you. Got it? All right, good afternoon. Thank you guys for allowing me to come in today and talk to you a little bit. Courtney, if you want to go to one more. So this is just going to be an overview of our special education department and some of the things that are required of special education, how students qualify for special education, and then compare a little bit about special education versus 504 plans, which are often kind of mentioned together. We'll talk about our special programs and some of the related services that go along with that. And then we'll talk a little bit about staffing needs, staffing concerns, and what our requirements are in trying to fill some of our positions. And then we'll look at overall district numbers and how those have fluctuated, changed, and grown. And at the end, some additional resources or just some links to some special ed, federal and local laws. So as far as special education law, the big one is the Individuals with Disabilities Act. It's been around for almost 50 years, IDEA. And that's what everyone in the country is bound to as far as providing special education services in schools. In Indiana, we use what's called Article 7. It's part of our administrative code. And it obviously includes everything that IDEA does, plus it tightens up some of the timelines and things a little more. The purpose of these laws is to make sure that every student receives what's called FAPE. That's free and appropriate public education. We have to offer that to all of the students that live within our physical district, whether they attend our buildings or not. They could be educated from home, they could go to a non-public school in our district, but it's still our responsibility to identify those students and provide services to those students. So how does a student qualify for special education? Anybody that has knowledge of the students can make a recommendation or a request for an evaluation. Obviously, that request would have to go to the parents. The school has 10 days to decide if we want to evaluate that student or not. Contact with the parents. If the parent wants to proceed, then we have 50 school days to get that evaluation done. And we look at a reevaluation every 3 years. Those evaluations have to be completed by a licensed school psychologist. And that's in bold print there because we'll talk about some of the staffing issues there, but they're the ones that have to do those evaluations, and they're tough to find sometimes. The bottom part there, that's a section from the Indiana Code from Article 7 for child find. We have the responsibility to identify any student in our district from ages 3 years old up to age 22 years old who might qualify for special education services. Again, whether they attend our schools or not, we still have that obligation. When students do qualify for special education, there are 13 very specific categories that they can qualify under. The 13 are listed there. Sometimes there's some confusion with a medical diagnosis and an educational diagnosis. So for example, one of the first ones there, autism spectrum disorder. Sometimes we'll have students who have been diagnosed by a physician with autism, but that isn't an automatic qualifier to receive services in school. We would still do our own evaluation, and we would look at educational autism. Dyslexia is another one that's been talked about a lot in recent years. You'll notice it's not listed up there. It could potentially fall under specific learning disability. So there's a little bit of difference between what is eligibility for school and then what are medical diagnoses outside of our buildings. When students do qualify, they get what's called an IEP, an individualized education plan. Some of the main points of that will have the academic levels of the student, their academic and functional performance, what their eligibility area is, and why they qualified for that eligibility area. When they turn 14 and every year after, they have a transition plan towards their life after school. It always has the accommodations and the modifications that are required to access the education. And that's the intent of the whole program. It's not to give anyone some type of advantage. It's to level the playing field for everyone through accommodations and modifications. The description, back up there, thanks. The description of our specially designed instruction. Measurable annual goals are a big part, and we do progress monitoring every 9 weeks or every time report cards go out. If a student qualifies, they'll also have provisions for related services such as occupational therapy, physical therapy, and things like that, which we'll talk more about on another slide. And then a determination for what's called the LRE, which stands for least restrictive environment, and any type of special programming that they might need. And again, we'll have a slide specific to LRE and programming. Something else that's unique to special education is something called a manifestation determination. So anytime we have a student with an IEP that is removed from school, either for 10, it could be cumulative, it could be consecutive, depending on what it is and if it constitutes a pattern. But anytime we hit that 10-day mark, we have the manifestation determination conference, and we look at was the behavior that occurred caused by or related to the eligibility area. And then based on that decision, we could go a couple different directions as far as discipline is concerned. The difference between special education and 504 plan. So in the blue, you see the IEP information. The disability has to adversely impact their access to education. So we're talking specifically about schools for an IEP, Article 7, IDEA, the Education Act. We can offer services, modifications, and accommodations, and we receive state and federal funding for any student that qualifies for special education services. 504s, on the other hand, are governed by a different law, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And you saw the 13 categories earlier for special education. There are no specific categories for a 504 plan. The disability just has to significantly impact a major life activity. And in just a second, we'll look at it's a short definition, but it's a very general definition. We typically only offer accommodations for a 504 plan. We can offer services, but you see in the last box there, there's no funding for that. So as we start to offer more and more services and the need from a 504 plan gets greater and greater, sometimes we'll start to look at, should we evaluate this student for special education services based on their growing needs. Sometimes, the last part there, students can have both. They can have a 504 plan and an IEP at the same time because those are governed by two different federal laws. And this is the definition of a 504 plan. Any person who has a physical or mental impairment which substantially limits one or more major life activities. And this could be documentation of it, or it could be generally assumed as having that impairment. An example we use a lot is ADHD. A parent could bring in a medical diagnosis of ADHD, and that could qualify them for a 504 plan. Or if the parent hasn't gotten that medical diagnosis, but the 504 committee generally assume that a student shows the symptoms of ADHD, that could qualify them also. As far as our special programs, our goal is to have all students in the gen ed class 100% of the time with supports. But we need to get them into what we feel is their LRE, their least restrictive environment. So if we're not able to support a student in the classroom, or if they need an individualized programming for themselves, those are 4 of our main programs there. Our CHAMPS program is for students with behavior concerns. The Applied Skills program is a program for students with significant cognitive disabilities. Our developmental preschool program is for students ages 3 to 5 if they qualify. And then the other end of that spectrum, our community transition program and employment is for our students that are 18 to 22 years old. Those are typically students that are working towards a certificate of completion. They've been in high school for 3, 4, 5 years. They've still got a couple more to go, so we're looking at what can we do now to bridge that gap between school and life in the community. Our related services. So within an IEP, sometimes it's determined that we have to have some additional services beyond what we think of as the typical educational services. And this would be something that the student needs to access their education. So occupational therapy and physical therapy, those are two of the bigger ones that we have to have. If a student is not able to hold a pencil, they're not able to access their education. So that's where we look at occupational therapy as one example. Physical therapy, if a student is not able to navigate steps in a school building or something like that, that's where that would come in. The others, speech and language pathology, blind, low vision, deaf of hard of hearing, those can actually be standalone eligibilities by themselves, but they're also sometimes in addition to the primary eligibility area. The last one there, behavior support, I have an asterisk because it's something that has increased. At some point we'll stop blaming COVID, but since COVID we've had a significant increase in some of our behavior needs, which are described on the next slide, Courtney. So some of the things we've just seen more explosive and dangerous behaviors at school. We've seen refusals and difficulties to attend school full time, which has caused us to create some other options for students. We've had increased numbers of students that are lacking the developmental milestones. Typically, when students come to school, we say they are school ready, but we've had a lot of students where potty training hasn't happened on the traditional time scale. There's more and more nonverbal communication. Social skills are lagging sometimes, struggling to follow schedules. We've seen an increased number of students coming from ABA centers, which are highly structured environments, a lot of one-to-one support. They're not schools. Students that attend, their focus is typically just on behavior, not necessarily academics. And when they come back, obviously we're a public school. We don't have the same type of structure and one-to-one support that they might have been used to, but we have to find that in order for them to be successful in our school. And also just a shortage of community mental health workers and services outside of the school districts that families and students might typically tap into. As far as staffing, I mentioned that earlier. The first blurb up there, school psychologist, their unemployment rate is 0.6%. Basically, that means if you're a school psychologist, if you have that certification and degree, you're going to have a job maybe anywhere you want, at the price you want, because they are in need and they are federally required. IEPs mandate the need for that, the evaluation part of that. Once students qualify, the other licensed therapists come into play, which are required. Last summer, our district worked with 12 different contracting companies trying to find school psychologists and SLPs. So it's not just posting it on our website or websites throughout the state or word of mouth. It's actually going out working with contracting companies. They don't have anybody either, so they're really tough to find. So if there's any young people listening out there and you're thinking about going to the education field, speech language pathologist, school psychologist, great route to go. The state understands this. The last part there, they've started a program called ISEAL. They know that special ed teachers are hard to find. So anyone with a bachelor's degree right now can get a free teaching license, no cost. Everything's taken care of. We have, it's probably more than 13 right now, staff members in our district that have enrolled in ISEAL or completed ISEAL working to get their special education license. So, and that's kind of where we are sometimes with staffing. We're looking at some of our instructional assistants and do they have a bachelor's degree? And if they do, would you like to become a teacher? Because you've got a free path to do that. Pros and cons of staffing or contracting staff. The pros there, it allows us to fill our required positions when we have no applicants. It allows us to hire people on a part-time basis, a temporary basis, or just as needed. We can cancel the contract if our needs change. And typically those people come into the job fully licensed, trained, and ready to go. Whereas like an ISEAL I just mentioned, we're kind of growing our own, training them along the way. The cons, the biggest one is the cost. Contracted staff can be anywhere from $60 to $120 an hour. You can see that ranges from the mid $80,000 to the over $170,000 for a typical 40-hour work week, from the low end to the high end. Sometimes they don't come with great quality. They may have the license, but it doesn't mean that they're going to be a quality employee right out of the gate. and there's no commitment with that. It's a breakable contract on our end and on their end too, so there's no guarantee they're going to stay here until the end of their contract. These are some of the numbers from our district going back about 10 years. You can just see the overall numbers from where we were in fiscal year 15 to where we were, that 962, that's our count as of December 1st of 2023. December 1st is a big number. That's when we turn in the numbers, and that determines our funding for the next year. So you can see how we're growing there. And on this slide, Courtney, if you want to click, this takes that information, presents a little bit different. The thing to look at there is the column that says special ed percentage. So as our district overall numbers have fluctuated, kind of gone up and down, our special ed numbers have continued to rise. So for fiscal year 24, we were up to 24.5% of our student population qualified for special education services. I've talked with other districts around us. I feel like that was a really high number. They're in the same boat. So it's happening across the board. These are some of the links that I mentioned. Federal laws are long and boring to read, but the one I have listed in royal blue there, navigating the course, that's kind of the cliff notes for special education for the Indiana version of Article 7. Anytime I want to just refresh my memory or if I have a question, I usually start with navigating the course. It's written in layman's terms, and then from there I can dig into Article 7 to get a little deeper. And that's it. Thank you.
Are there any questions?
Just one quick question. I know that you said there were 13 individuals within the district that were on the licensing pathway.
Mm-hmm.
How long does the licensing take?
About 18 months.
About 18 months.
Yep.
Okay.
And the good thing about it is once they get accepted into the program, they can get a temporary license and they can work as a special ed teacher while they're taking those classes versus waiting that 18 months in order to fill that role.
Would they be able to say like operate as a speech pathologist also, or is that an additional?
No, that's different. So
okay.
Teaching license is different. Anything else up there such as occupational therapy, physical therapy, SLP, or school psych, you're looking at a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, plus an additional, typically a year type of internship with that. So much longer path. And they don't have the shortcut path
Sure.
for that like they do with ICU.
Thank you.
Yep.
Nate, I have a question. On the IEP, you said we had to provide services to non-public schools
Mhm.
and also homeschool. Do we have people that we have to send out to a homeschool?
So with our non-public schools, we employ 2 employees. In our federal grant, our Part B grant, there's something called our proportionate share, and it's devoted to our non-public schools. So we provide 2 teachers, a special ed teacher and a speech language pathologist for our non-public school. And then our home schools, we typically handle those on a case-by-case basis. We offer an IEP for students that qualify. If parents want to homeschool, they typically deny that IEP. They're denying FAPE, their free and appropriate public education, and we write what's called a service plan. And then we just do that on an individual basis based on what we are comfortable offering and what the parent feels they need.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
I have a question, if you don't mind. A couple things. Do you know what percent or how many of your employees are contracted versus in-house already?
I don't know what percent. I've got in my office down the hall, there's a big whiteboard that's got all of our full-time employees, contracted employees. I could do the math and figure that out. But I don't know offhand.
I'm just more curious on that one. So when we bring the employees on board, like the licensed social workers that we took on board, what's your standard to measure that versus a contractor? If you have both of those in-house, how do you measure them in your department? How do you keep, like you said, there's some good employees, bad employees, that's regardless if they're on your payroll or they're contracted. How do you keep controls of that or consistency on that?
So like the social workers aren't part of our department at all. Our contracted people are typically the therapist as far as occupational therapist, physical therapist. We haven't contracted with any special education teachers since I've been here. It's just the federally required positions of school psych to get them evaluated, and then the therapists that have to be offered through that IEP. So as far as like evaluating the quality, if they're our employee, we do our standard evaluation. We don't do any of that type of formal evaluation for our contracted people. It's more just informal through my observations of them, through conversations with teachers and principals that work with those employees. And it's usually fairly obvious if they're doing a good job or if they're not.
And the two folks we're looking at approving tonight, what is their are there a contract, obviously? Is that a similar day? How many day a year contract is that? Or
Are these-
am I misunderstanding that?
The two from last board meeting.
Yes.
So we're looking at moving them from contracted employees to direct hire.
Yeah, but when they come to
Employees.
your organization, how many days a year is that? Is that on a
So our-
contract internally?
Our speech language pathologists will work a 184-day contract, same as teachers. And the occupational therapist will work 4 days a week. And the salary will be prorated for those 4 days a week. And the hiring rate is the same as our standard teacher contract, based on years of experience.
Okay, because now we're able to see the salary of that. That's why I'm asking that question. Is just how many days a week or how many days a year is that?
Yeah. The salary
Expect-
should line up with the standard master teacher's contract for those two people.
Where if they're are contracted, we don't control that.
Right.
They can charge whatever, and
Exactly.
we have to have the psychs to do the eval, so.
Right. I negotiate directly with our contracted people and we determine a rate from there.
Sure, and also I have a question that piggybacks onto, to Matt's question about the non-public school. Not only do we have to supply the individuals to provide those services to the non-public school individuals, but let's say if it's a private school, don't we have to also pay for devices if they need that, any software that they need? So it's not just the individuals, it's any additional resources or tools that those individuals will need. The public schools also mandated to pay for that.
Right. So as I mentioned earlier in our Part B grant, the proportionate share, as long as I've been here, we've managed to cover everything that's needed for our non-pub and homeschool students within that already federally mandated portion. So that's the only place that money can go. We haven't gone past that dollar amount.
Okay, thank you.
And the question we had on the last meeting was how much is the savings? And I think we have that numbered out, don't we, Ms. Lips?
Yes, we
Yeah.
gave that to you last time
Well, I just
afterwards.
didn't know for the public, if the public knew what that was, or if it was $5,800 or $7,800 or whatever it was. It was a,
The longevity of it, I think, Mr. Dilly said, I think we said it was under 10,000 for
Yeah.
this particular time, but you said over the longevity of it, it would be, did you say,
It was
Well,
over
right off the bat, it's
12,000.
a savings for both of the positions from what we were paying for a contracted speech language pathologist to what we're paying in-house. And the occupational therapist is actually adding a day. So it went from 3 days to 4 days. But if you project those out, that was still roughly $5,000 a year right off the bat.
For that person, right? It wasn't around 12,000 for the other individual, so.
yes,
what I was
Quite
right.
Yeah, quite a bit of money,
12,000.
quite a bit of savings for the district.
Yeah, Mrs. Lips and I were talking today about a hire that we need to make for a physical therapist, and the rate that I was talking with them today was still significantly lower than, I had a sheet in front of me of contracted rates, which were $88 to $120 an hour for a physical therapist. So by contracting directly with them, we were still $10 to $15 an hour lower than those rates.
and then in this case we're looking at also adding an assistant director for you as well, right?
Yes.
That's on tonight's notes as well. Okay. No, and I appreciate the information. It's very, very helpful to understand what the department sees, the challenges that you have, the difference, pros and cons of this. I mean, I appreciate you coming here and giving us a rundown from the department. It means a lot.
Well, I know last year we had a similar situation in reverse, if I remember correctly, where we had a staff member that had resigned and then later came back as an independent contractor at a higher rate of pay, and your hands were tied. We couldn't do anything about that. So thank you for finding these staff members and building relationships with them, and what you do is hard. And-
Thank you.
And it's appreciated.
Yes,
It is.
very
And
much
sometimes
appreciated.
doing what's
Very
right for
much.
students, you can't look at the dollar figure. You have to just do what's right and what's required. So thank you.
He's a good recruiter. I don't know how many times I've heard about eye seal. We-
That's a great.
I mean,
and,
yeah, I feel like going to get my eye
Yeah.
sealed just because of him.
There was
He's a
that
great
precedent.
recruiter.
Yeah, there was probably a year where I mentioned it at every single monthly meeting, just to make sure people knew about it.
But also in adding the assistant that's on our agenda this evening, you also had a person who resigned, and this assistant position is also absorbing those duties. So it wasn't just, I want the
Correct.
public to understand, it's not just a brand-new position that we're just taking, with no forethought. It was a position that a person had left also, and she's stepping into that role and taking on some of those additional duties, so.
And these
Correct. We didn't
positions come
fill
out of a
position.
grant. They don't, they're not out of the general fund or the education fund. They're all out of grant.
Well, this one would be out of the education, it's staying where it's at in the
Right,
education
The
fund.
assistant, yeah.
But
But
Yeah,
the other
yeah.
ones,
the position, the other position, we're not going to fill.
Yep.
So
Right.
It works out to be about half of the.
Good.
It's a savings.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dilly. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. At this time, the district recommends approval of the personnel report.
Okay, do I have a motion?
Matt, can we talk about that a little bit more? Is that okay?
Yeah, you're fine. I was just going to ask for questions
Oh.
before, but I was going to
Yes,
ask
for
for.
motion, so, the question, we had this meeting scheduled for the 2 people from Mr. Dilly's department. And then we've added quite a bit of stuff to this. I'm not sure if everybody has an issue with approving it all. I think there's some other dialogue on the rest of it. I would prefer if we just motion to table everything besides the 2 that the meeting was scheduled for, but that's just my discussion, I guess. I see what others say and
Well, due to the start of school and just transactions, transitions, and that kind of thing, we wanted to secure these positions and have them move forward with the 24-25 school year. So we thought this was an appropriate time and.
Well,
we
our
can-
board meeting got moved, it's a week later, which is right
It's
before
July
the start of
25th.
school. Yes.
The next board meeting is July 25th and we start school August 1.
Yeah,
Sure.
so,
well, I trust that Superintendent Boland vetted these positions and these hires, and these are. his
Absolutely, and all the
these are his
people that have recommended them
recommendations
have,
and the
yes.
administration, so.
Okay.
I'm fine moving forward with them.
I'm fine with moving forward as well, and I've heard, some of the ones from last meeting that we've hired that started July 1st have done an excellent job.
Great.
So I think
great.
we're, I trust the recommendations.
All right, I want to discuss the one if we're going to push the rest of them, which I think the discussion with the nepotism with one of our coaches, Dave Knuckles, is
Wait,
going to be one that I would like to pull.
We can't name names.
Oh, I'm sorry.
As our district's attorney has advised legally, the MOUs are signed. They were signed last year. They would be signed again this year. And this is a professional decision. It's based on the candidates that are best for the position, for the job. And according to our attorney, everything is according to Hoyle and we're good.
Well, and I'm going to dig into that just a little bit more. I'm going to ask, because I asked a couple questions about this, and I don't, when I look at the lawyer's reply, he talks about the legal side of it, and then he talks about the optics of it. And I think that's one thing that I see in it a little different. I'm just a little bit different. I understand the legalities of it. The nepotism side is always depending on what lens you're looking through, and I get that. And I think that's where, when I look at the optics of this with our org flow chart, where it's going to be the principal, assistant principals, athletic director, assistant athletic directors, directly or indirectly, it depends on how you look at that. And I that's where I'm looking at it to say, when I look at the personnel section of one person on there, I guess I have more of a discussion to that. It's not.
Perception is valid. Perception, optics, personal agendas, those things are all in play, but they're variables. The things that we know that are constant and are the truth, the data, is that our assistant principal reports directly to the high school principal. And the assistant athletic directors report directly to the athletic director. There are 2 lines, 2 chains there, and they're not connected with their duties in that regard.
And I was asked from multiple people about, do these positions post for the assistant athletic director positions? And I'm not sure that's true or not. Is that a position that's posted? I saw where one of the assistant athletic directors is resigned from his position, and then this position comes to 2 people.
Based on past precedent, we have given directors in various forms, whether it be the athletic director, whether it be the concession stand manager, whether it be a musical or fine arts assistant, an event manager. Those things are appointed department chair by principal or an orchestra director or an athletic director, someone like that. Those people in charge have the discretion, the professional discretion to make those selections. And as far as the assistant athletic director, that's not a stipend listed in our master teacher contract.
So that doesn't have to be posted.
It does not have to be posted. We are going on past precedent, and it is not a stipend listed in our master contract.
And we're talking extracurricular positions, right, Mrs. Lips? We're not talking a director kind of position. Those positions obviously would have to be posted.
Right, exactly.
And these aren't new positions. These are just replacing.
This is a replacement. About 10 years ago, we had 2 people that shared the position. One person left for another job in another community, and the one person stayed on doing the job solely by himself. At this time, he has resigned for personal reasons because of his child be going to college, can be competing, and he won't have as many evening activity time slots open. And so we found 2 other people that are perfect candidates because of their roles in our school district.
Yeah, and it's nothing against the people. I think that sometimes people make this where it's a personal issue with the 2 people. I don't have an issue with who you choose, Mr. Staggs. I understand that. So when I look at some of this stuff, it's just more the conversation of the optics. That's been something that's been brought up. I've heard it from multiple people, and that's why I'm asking the question. I would like to approve everything but the one, but if I can't say the name, I'm not sure how I could pull them off of that, so. We did on the last one.
Yeah,
Just
I mean,
voting over
you
the
can just
personnel report.
put the title out there if you want to pull the title, but it'd have to take a motion and a second and everyone to approve to pull that off.
I'll make a motion to remove the second athletic director from the rest of the personnel.
Okay, there's a motion to remove the second athletic position from the personnel report.
Are you making a motion to remove and then vote on separately,
And vote on
or,
separately,
or
please.
to remove completely?
Just remove and vote on separately.
So it would be moving one, but still be voted on.
So 2
It wouldn't
votes.
be taken completely off. It would just be a separate vote. Is
To
that-
pull that second item out.
And
Okay.
vote on it separately.
Okay,
So, but it would still be voted on tonight.
Tonight.
Just a separate vote from the rest of it.
That's correct.
okay.
I'd second Dan's motion to do that as long as it was voted on, still separately.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Or all those opposed? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we have 3-2, so the motion carried.
So we'll vote on that item separately.
Yep. Yep.
You have 2 votes. We'll proceed with the first, with the personnel report minus the 1 item that has been pulled and voted on. The personnel report, the district recommends approval.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve all of those on the personnel report minus the 1 athletic position?
I move to approve.
I'll
I'll-
second.
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I'll second.
Are there any questions? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carried.
Now we'll have a second vote, and the district recommends approval of the second assistant athletic director as proposed by our athletic director, Kip Stack.
I would like to say something before we vote on that, Matt. And we've said it before too, I think when it came up last year too. You know, we live in a small community, a close-knit community, and there is always going to be some relation that's going to work here in some form or fashion. And in this particular situation, you know, I have the utmost confidence in our administrators that they're handing out the duties. They are doing the evaluations. There's no direct tie between this person and perceived supervisor. And I think it just goes back to perception and how people look at it. But we're all professional enough in this corporation that, I have, again, full faith in our administrators that those things aren't going to happen. So I just want to throw that out there. There's going to be a lot of always relationships that work in this school district, among other places, here in town. So.
I want to piggyback on that from Mrs. Decker. I definitely agree because I know several years ago, I've been here, lived here all my life, except for 3 years that I was in Columbus. And we had that situation where somebody that didn't know the community came in and a lot of people left because they got tired of dealing with that. So we lost a lot of good people because of perception.
Right.
So I want to say that too.
Yeah, and I'd like to say, just on that, when you look at the business world, you look at a lot of things you're trying to do. If it's a different school, and if it's a different flow of your org chart that we put out, it's not that odd of a question. It's nothing against because I haven't lived here for 30 years. I look at this to try to do the right thing for our families and the people that I talk to, and I talk to a lot of folks about this. In the business world, my son couldn't work from below down the chain regardless of direct or indirect, and I get it. It's just a question to ask about the flow, and 1 of 4 people can vote against it, and it's not personal. I mean, it's not. I just look at this to say if one person was over here, one person was over here, it's a different flow is all it is. So it's not a personal attack on anybody when I talk about this stuff.
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second that.
There's been a motion and a second to approve. All those in favor of the second athletic director's position signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Aye.
Motion carried. All right. I think that's all we have after that. Do I have a motion for adjournment?
I'll make a motion to adjourn, Matt.
I'll second that. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.